The naval training compound on the edge of Coronado hummed with the same intensity it carried every morning. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden wash over the Pacific, but the base was already alive. Boots hammered against asphalt. In cadence, whistles pierced the air. Instructors barked commands sharp enough to slice through the salty breeze. For the men undergoing one of the world's most brutal military trainings, dawn was never gentle. It was war in miniature, fought against time, pain, and exhaustion. Among the mass of uniformed bodies, a single figure stood out, not because she wanted to, but because she simply didn't belong. A young woman walked slowly across the edge of the training grounds, her sneakers crunching lightly against the gravel. She was dressed in civilian athletic wear black leggings, a gray hoodie, and running shoes that had seen long miles. A ponytail of chestnut hair swayed behind her as she moved with quiet curiosity, her eyes never leaving the men as they strained through obstacle after obstacle. Some of the candidates noticed her immediately. Visitors weren't unheard of, but they were usually family members or dignitaries escorted with ceremony. This one looked different, unassuming, yet strangely composed, as though she wasn't surprised by the chaos around her. She wasn't laughing or taking pictures. She was simply watching, eyes sharp, as if memorizing every detail of what these men endured. "Who's that?" one of the trainees muttered under his breath as he wiped sweat from his brow. His teammate shrugged. "Friend of someone," came the reply. "Probably just here for a look." The assumption was easy. Women rarely stepped into this corner of the world, and when they did, they were usually relegated to the sidelines, watching a brother, a boyfriend, or a son suffer through the trials. Nobody imagined a woman would stand there with the quiet intensity of someone studying the field, as though planning to step into it herself. She wasn't alone. Walking a pace ahead of her was Lieutenant Jake Mercer, a current SEAL candidate and longtime family friend. He had known her since childhood and had casually invited her along for a morning visit. To him, it was nothing more than letting her see the grit of his world, a glimpse into the life he had chosen. "You okay?" Jake asked, glancing back at her as they paused near the edge of the running track. She nodded, her eyes still locked on the sweating trainees pounding past. "Yeah," she said simply. Her voice carried no awe, no hesitation, just calm observation. Jake gave a small laugh. Not exactly the kind of place people usually enjoy hanging out. "I figured you'd be bored out of your mind." "Not bored," she murmured. "Curious." Her gaze followed the men as they collapsed onto the ground at the end of a drill, chest heaving, arms trembling from exertion. She studied them the way a coach studies athletes, noting form, pacing, rhythm. It wasn't judgmental, just precise, as though her mind was running calculations. The instructors noticed her too. One of them, Chief Petty Officer Harris, squinted in her direction, his weathered face skeptical. "Mercer," he barked. "Who's your shadow?" Jake stiffened. "Just a friend visiting, Chief. Won't get in the way." Harris grunted, unconvinced but uninterested in wasting more energy. He turned back to the candidates, roaring at them to push harder, move faster. The sound of bodies hitting the ground filled the air as push-ups began, the dirt swallowing sweat. The young woman, her name was Claire, folded her arms lightly across her chest, shifting her weight as she watched. Her lips pressed together in thought. She had always carried herself with a kind of quiet self-assurance, the sort that didn't demand attention, but naturally drew it. She didn't fidget, didn't look lost. She simply belonged to herself, and in a place where nearly every man was stripped down to raw exhaustion, her steadiness was striking. A group of SEAL candidates jogging by exchanged grins. One of them, broad-shouldered with a smirk plastered on his face, leaned toward his buddy. "Bet she thinks this is all insane," he muttered. Can't imagine she'd last 2 minutes out here. His friend chuckled, shaking his head. Forget 2 minutes. 30 seconds tops. This isn't some fun run. They didn't say it cruelly, just dismissively. The same way one dismisses the idea of rain falling in the desert. It wasn't meant for her. Claire heard them, though. She didn't flinch, didn't react. Instead, she lowered her eyes slightly, her expression unreadable. Only Jake caught the flicker in her face, a look he had seen before whenever someone underestimated her. He remembered the time in high school when she had signed up for a half marathon, just to try. Nobody thought she'd finish. She not only finished, she came in first for her division. He remembered the college triathlon she entered on a dare. She hadn't trained for swimming in open water, but she pushed herself through the current until she crossed the finish line, shivering but triumphant. Claire had a habit of meeting disbelief with quiet defiance. Jake smiled faintly, suddenly curious to see how this morning would unfold. As the drills wore on, Claire drifted closer, careful not to intrude, yet unable to stop herself from inching toward the track. The smell of salt and sweat filled the air, the ground vibrating with the thud of boots. She tilted her head, studying the rhythm of the men's strides, the way their shoulders sagged under fatigue. She wasn't impressed by strength for its own sake. She was fascinated by endurance, by the mental edge it took to keep moving when the body begged to stop. At one point, an instructor blew his whistle and called for a 5-minute water break. The men staggered toward the edge of the field, chugging from canteens, collapsing on benches. Harris's eyes flicked back to Claire, still standing there, arms folded. "You enjoying the show?" he asked dryly, approaching her with the heavy steps of a man who had seen too many curious onlookers. Claire met his gaze evenly. "It's impressive," she said, choosing her words carefully, "but not impossible." A murmur rippled through the nearby candidates who overheard. Not impossible? To them, it was a phrase reserved for those who hadn't endured weeks of pain, hunger, and mental torment. To suggest this was anything less than near impossible felt like an insult. Harris raised an eyebrow, his weathered face unreadable. "Not impossible, huh?" He studied her a moment longer, then barked a short laugh. "Well, you've got confidence. I'll give you that." Claire simply nodded. She wasn't joking, and her calmness unsettled him more than if she had laughed nervously or looked away. Jake stepped in quickly, sensing the tension. "She's just observing, Chief. That's all." But the damage was done. The seed had been planted in the minds of the men around her. This visitor wasn't like others. She wasn't impressed by their suffering. She wasn't wide-eyed at their grit. She looked at the challenge as though it were something she might one day take on herself. The men shook their heads, exchanging smirks and scoffs. But a few couldn't shake the image of her steady gaze, her measured tone. They didn't know it yet, but they had just met the person who would soon rewrite a piece of their history. For now, though, she remained an outsider, a shadow at the edge of their world. And yet, in that moment, Claire knew something with quiet certainty. She hadn't come here just to watch. She had come because part of her wanted to step forward, to test herself against the impossible. The SEALs thought she was only visiting. They didn't realize the story had already begun. Claire had always carried an air of quiet strength, but few outside her circle understood where it came from. To strangers, she was simply athletic, disciplined, perhaps a little competitive. But those who knew her best understood that her entire life had been molded by something deeper, an environment where grit wasn't just admired, it was expected. Her father, Colonel Daniel Whitaker, had served 30 years in the U.S. Army. His career meant constant relocations, long stretches of absence, and an upbringing shaped by strict routines. Claire didn't grow up with the same carefree chaos as her classmates. While other children played video games or slept in on Saturdays, her mornings began at dawn. By the time she was 10, she could lace her sneakers in the dark, tie her ponytail in 30 seconds, and be outside running laps before the sun even peeked over the rooftops. Her father never pushed her with cruelty, but with conviction. "The body breaks before the mind does," he often told her. "If you can train your mind to keep going, your body will follow." At first, the words confused her, but over the years, she came to understand. Every long run, every grueling swim, every icy shower when her muscles screamed in protest, those were lessons in control. In the Whitaker household, comfort was never the goal. Growth was. Her mother, Emily, brought balance, while her father hardened her edges. Emily softened them with quiet encouragement. She didn't care if Claire won races or shattered records. What mattered to her was that her daughter understood humility. "Discipline makes you strong," Emily would say, "but humility makes you human." Claire grew up carrying both truths inside her, a rare combination of steel and grace. By high school, her reputation was set. Teachers knew her as the girl who never gave excuses. Coaches described her as relentless. Teammates admired her but often kept their distance, sensing she demanded more from herself than anyone else could. While other students laughed and chatted in locker rooms, Claire sat tying her shoes with methodical focus, already visualizing the miles ahead. It was during those years that she discovered her love for distance. Sprinting never interested her. Short bursts of speed felt too easy, too fleeting. But endurance, the slow, painful battle between lungs and legs, between the voice that screamed, "Stop," and the one that whispered, "Keep going," that was where she thrived. It wasn't about outrunning others. It was about outrunning her own limits. At 16, she entered her first half marathon. No one expected much. She was just a teenager competing against seasoned runners. But mile after mile, she surprised everyone. Her stride was smooth, her breathing steady, her eyes locked forward. When she crossed the finish line, she wasn't just first in her age group. She was first overall among women. The local paper called her a quiet phenomenon, but Claire didn't even keep the clipping. To her, the real victory wasn't the medal but the knowledge that she hadn't listened when her body begged her to quit at mile 11. College brought new challenges. At the University of Oregon, she joined the track and field club, but quickly realized her passion lay elsewhere. Road races, triathlons, even mountain trail runs. She craved variety, the kind of challenges that tested more than just one muscle group. During her sophomore year, a friend dared her to enter an amateur triathlon. Claire had no formal training in swimming, but she accepted anyway. The race nearly broke her. The water was colder than anything she had trained for, and halfway through, she felt her arms locking up. Most would have quit. Claire pushed forward, reminding herself of her father's words. "The body breaks before the mind does." She finished. Exhausted, her lips blue, but she finished. Months later, she entered another triathlon, this time prepared. She didn't just complete it, she placed third. Despite her achievements, she never bragged. In fact, she avoided attention whenever possible. Friends often teased her about being too humble, but Claire didn't see it that way. "If you brag about winning, you've already lost something more important," she explained once. To her, the prize was internal, the knowledge that she had faced herself and endured. Her life wasn't without setbacks. A stress fracture in her shin during her junior year sidelined her for months. For the first time, she couldn't run, couldn't train, couldn't chase the rhythm that had defined her days since childhood. The frustration was unbearable, but she refused to waste the time sulking. Instead, she adapted swimming laps, lifting weights, practicing yoga. When her leg healed, she came back stronger, faster, more balanced. By her mid-20s, Claire had built a quiet legacy among amateur endurance athletes. She had medals, tucked away in shoeboxes, trophies gathering dust on closet shelves. To outsiders, she was extraordinary. But to herself, she was just curious. Each event was another question she wanted to answer. How far could I go? How much could I endure? What happens if I push just one step further? That mindset often baffled. Others, friends, urged her to slow down, to enjoy life instead of constantly seeking the next test. But Claire didn't chase challenges for glory or recognition. She chased them because they revealed something about her that everyday life couldn't. Pain stripped away the unnecessary. Exhaustion silenced the noise of doubt. In those moments, she found a kind of clarity no classroom or job could give her. It was that curiosity, the relentless desire to test limits, that eventually led her to Jake Mercer, her childhood friend who had chosen the path of the Navy. When Jake invited her to visit the SEAL training compound, she didn't hesitate. Not because she dreamed of joining, but because the chance to witness the toughest training in the world was irresistible. She wanted to see what impossible looked like up close. Yet even as she walked onto that compound, blending into the edges of the field, Claire carried all of her hidden background with her. The years of discipline, the dawn runs, the triathlons, the injuries, the recoveries, they all lived beneath her calm surface. The men around her saw only a visitor in leggings and a hoodie, but beneath that exterior was someone forged by 2 decades of testing herself against limits. And while they assumed she was only watching, Claire felt something stirring inside her. The same spark that had led her to run that first half marathon, to dive into freezing water, to push past the fracture in her leg, it flickered again as she studied the SEAL candidates gasping for breath, bodies trembling from exhaustion. Her mind whispered the same question it always did when she encountered a challenge. What if I gave it a try? She didn't know it yet, but the question would change everything. The morning sun had climbed higher, stretching long shadows across the training compound. The SEAL candidates were now drenched in sweat, their faces twisted in pain as instructors barked orders with relentless ferocity. The air smelled of salt, dirt, and determination. Claire stood quietly at the edge, arms folded, her hoodie tugged snug against her frame. She didn't fidget, didn't yawn like a bored visitor. She studied. To most, the scene unfolding looked like punishment. To Claire, it was possibility. The obstacle course wasn't intimidating. It was inviting, daring her to see how far she could go. Several candidates stole glances her way. It wasn't common to have outsiders watching, especially one who held herself with such steady composure. Some men smiled, amused. Others rolled their eyes, dismissing her as someone who couldn't possibly understand what they endured. One voice, sharp and teasing, cut through the air. "Hey, Mercer," a broad-shouldered candidate shouted between drills, nodding toward Claire. "Your friend looks like she's itching to get in here. What do you say? Want to give it a try?" The words were meant as a joke, tossed casually into the air to spark laughter and ease the tension of training. A few men chuckled, some shaking their heads. Nobody expected a response. But Claire turned her head toward him, meeting his gaze with calm, unwavering eyes. Then, to everyone's surprise, she nodded once. Sure, the laughter that followed was louder this time, filled with disbelief. Jake, standing nearby, blinked in shock. "Claire, you don't have to." "I know," she interrupted softly, "but I want to." The casual smirks on the men's faces deepened. They'd seen cocky outsiders before, tourists, young athletes, even Marines who thought they could step into SEAL territory and hold their own. All had failed. A compound was a crucible designed to break the strongest, to humiliate the unprepared. And here was a woman, not even in uniform, offering herself up like it was no big deal. Chief Harris overheard the exchange and strode over, his boots crunching against gravel. His presence silenced the laughter almost instantly. He was a man whose glare could cut steel. "What's this?" he barked, looking between Claire and the candidates. "She said she wants to give it a try, Chief," one of the men said, still grinning. Harris narrowed his eyes at Claire. "This isn't a playground. These drills aren't for visitors." "I understand," she said, her tone even. Harris studied her for a long moment. Most people shrank beneath his stare. Claire didn't. She didn't puff her chest out in defiance either. She simply held his gaze with quiet steadiness. Something about her demeanor made him pause. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. "Fine. Let's see how long you last. Don't expect special treatment." The men around him smirked, whispering bets. Under their breath, some gave her 30 seconds. Others said a minute, tops. Jake opened his mouth to intervene, but when he saw the calm determination on Claire's face, he closed it again. He had seen that look before during the triathlons, the marathons, the injuries. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because something inside her wanted to know if she could. The candidates lined up again, this time with Claire at the end of the row. Her presence looked out of place, leggings among camouflage, a slim figure among muscular builds, but her posture betrayed no hesitation. She bent to adjust her sneakers, tied the laces tighter, then rolled her shoulders back. "All right," Harris barked. 2-mile timed run. Go! The whistle blew, and the men surged forward. Dust kicked up into the air. Claire fell into stride. At the back, her pace measured. Laughter echoed briefly, some men already predicting she'd stop before the first lap. But then something unusual happened. Her stride didn't falter. Her breathing didn't hitch. Lap after lap, she maintained a rhythm as steady as a metronome. Candidates ahead began to tire, their legs heavy, their arms pumping awkwardly. Claire, though, remained consistent, her ponytail swaying in time with each step. By the third lap, whispers started. "She's still going." "Yeah, but she dropped soon. Look at her, she hasn't even slowed." Jake watched with a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. He'd seen this before, people mistaking Claire's quietness for weakness, only to discover hidden endurance. She didn't sprint. She didn't waste energy. She conserved, endured, waited for the moment when others cracked. The run ended, and Claire crossed the line, not first, but not last either, comfortably in the middle. Some men who had doubted her seconds earlier now stared, surprised. She didn't celebrate. She simply slowed to a walk, hands on her hips, breathing steady. "Not bad for a warm-up," she said softly. The words rippled like electricity. Some laughed, some scowled, but everyone heard. Harris's brow furrowed. He motioned to the pull-up bar. "All right, hotshot. Let's see what you've got. Max. Reps, no breaks." Claire wiped sweat from her palms onto her hoodie, then gripped the bar. Her arms flexed as she lifted herself smoothly, chin clearing the bar with ease. 1, 2, 3. The men counted silently in their heads, expecting her to burn out quickly. But the numbers kept climbing. 10, 15, 20. By 25, several of the candidates had folded their arms, their smirks fading. She dropped at 30, shaking out her arms, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Someone whistled low. "Damn." Harris said nothing, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the obstacle course. "Let's go." Full circuit. Time trial. The course was notorious ropes, walls, tunnels, balance beams, monkey bars slick with sweat. It broke men daily. Claire studied it with calm focus, mapping out her path in her mind. When Harris blew the whistle, she launched forward. She wasn't the fastest, but she was efficient. Every movement was deliberate, every grip sure. She scaled the rope with practiced ease, swung across the bars without hesitation, crawled through the dirt tunnel with barely a pause. By the time she leapt the final wall, the stopwatch revealed she'd beaten several candidates' times. The compound was silent. The disbelief was palpable. Claire stood at the end, brushing dust from her hands, her face calm, but her eyes bright. She hadn't just survived. She'd impressed. Jake finally broke the silence with a laugh. Told you not to underestimate her. The men exchanged glances, their earlier amusement giving way to something else, respect, tinged with unease. Claire wasn't a tourist anymore. She was a contender. Harris stepped forward, his voice low but firm. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts alone don't get you through SEAL training. You think you're tough? The record's 12 years old? Nobody here's broken it yet. You want to prove yourself. That's the line you aim for. His words weren't meant as encouragement. They were a challenge, a wall thrown in her path. But Claire's eyes flickered with that spark again, the same spark that had carried her through every marathon, every injury, every triathlon she wasn't supposed to finish. She didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She simply met his gaze with quiet resolve. In that moment, the men around her realized this wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't curiosity. This was the beginning of something they hadn't seen coming. A spark had been lit, and sparks, everyone knew, had a way of becoming fire. The whistle's shrill cry cut through the compound like a blade, and in that instant, Claire's world narrowed. The chatter, the skepticism, even Jake's protective glances, all of it faded into background noise. Ahead lay the test, the one thing standing between her and the unspoken question that had gnawed at her since she first set foot on the training grounds. Could she endure what these men endured? The SEALs surged forward as one, their boots pounding the dirt, forming a storm of sweat and muscle. Claire followed, her sneakers lighter against the gravel, but no less determined. The run was the first gauntlet, 4 miles at a punishing pace, designed to separate the contenders from the pretenders. Within minutes, the candidates' faces hardened into masks of pain, breath sharp, strides shortening. Claire, though, settled into rhythm. Her body recognized the cadence, the burn in her lungs, the heaviness in her legs. This was familiar terrain. She focused on her breathing. Inhale, exhale, 2 steps, repeat. Each lap blurred into the next until, to her own surprise, she was overtaking men who had laughed minutes earlier. Holy hell, one of them muttered as she passed, ponytail swaying like a banner of defiance. By the end, she wasn't first. But she wasn't last either. Middle of the pack, steady as stone. She bent over briefly, hands on her knees, then stood tall, rolling her shoulders back. Around her, men gasped for air, some doubled over. Claire's chest rose and fell, but her eyes held the same calm focus. Chief Harris's jaw tightened. He wanted to see her stumble. Instead, he barked the next command. Push-ups. 2 minutes. As many as you can. Move. Bodies hit the dirt in unison. Claire dropped beside them, palms pressing into the earth. Her arms pumped smoothly, each rep clean, precise. She didn't rush. She conserved. The men around her started strong, knocking out rapid sets, but their pace faltered as the seconds dragged on. Claire kept steady, her breaths controlled, sweat dripping down her temple. 1 minute. Harris roared. A candidate beside her collapsed, chest heaving, face buried in the dirt. Claire didn't glance his way. She pressed on, her rhythm unwavering. Time! The whistle blew, and Claire pushed herself upright, arms trembling but steady. Her count matched some of the stronger candidates, Not the best, not the worst. But what unsettled the men most wasn't her number. It was her composure. Sit-ups, 2 minutes. The cycle continued. Sit-ups, pull-ups, burpees. Drill after drill designed to sap strength, drain willpower, expose weakness. Sweat stung Claire's eyes. Her muscles screamed in rebellion, but she fought back with each movement. Her father's words echoed in her head. The body breaks before the mind does. She repeated the mantra with every rep, every breath, until her body obeyed the rhythm of her will. By the time they reached the pull-up bar, murmurs rippled among the men. Claire gripped the cold nettle, pulling herself up with smooth, measured control. 1, 2, 3. She reached 15, past 20, and still climbed. When she dropped at 30, silence followed. A silence heavy with disbelief. Chief Harris's stare was unreadable. His whistle clenched in his teeth. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes, a reluctant acknowledgement. Jake, watching from the sidelines, felt his chest swell with pride. He had seen Claire do incredible things before, but this was different. This wasn't just a marathon or a triathlon. This was her stepping into the crucible of the toughest training in the world and holding her own. The final test of the day loomed, the obstacle course. A twisting labyrinth of walls, ropes, tunnels, balance beams, and monkey bars slick with sweat. It wasn't designed for fairness. It was designed to break spirit. "Line up," Harris barked. The men gathered, breathing hard, wiping sweat from their brows. Claire stood among them, smaller in stature, but her presence no longer seemed out of place. She bent her knees, adjusted her laces once more, and lifted her gaze to the first wall. "Go!" The stopwatch started. Candidates launched forward, scrambling at the wall, pulling themselves over with grunts and curses. Claire sprinted after them, leaping high, fingers gripping the edge. For a split second, her body dangled. Then, with a powerful pull, she swung. Her leg over and dropped cleanly to the other side. She hit the rope climb next. Her hands burned, rope fibers digging into her skin, but her grip held strong. She climbed steadily, faster than a few who struggled halfway before sliding back. Down. At the top, she slapped the beam and descended, landing with a controlled thud. The course blurred into a relentless sequence. She crawled through the mud tunnel, grit scraping against her elbows, the stench of dirt filling her nostrils. She swung across the monkey bars, palms slick, a grip unyielding. On the balance beam, she moved with surprising grace, years of trail running granting her stability. At each obstacle, the whispers grew. Candidates who had mocked her minutes earlier now stole glances, eyes wide with disbelief. She wasn't just surviving the course, she was mastering it. When she leapt the final wall and crossed the finish, Harris clicked the stopwatch. His brow furrowed. Her time wasn't record-breaking, but it wasn't beginner's luck either. She had beaten nearly a third of the candidates' men who had trained months for this moment. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. Claire straightened, brushing dirt from her hoodie, chest heaving but eyes calm. Jake stepped forward, unable to hide his grin. "You still think she's just visiting?" He asked the men around him. No one answered. Harris finally spoke, his voice gravelly. Not bad at all. But this, he gestured at the course, at the panting men, this is just a taste. Records aren't broken on curiosity. They're broken on pain, and pain hasn't even started yet. His words weren't dismissal. They were a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Claire didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but in her eyes the spark burned brighter than ever. The same spark that had carried her through marathons, triathlons, broken bones. Around her, the SEAL candidates shifted. Uneasily. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They weren't scoffing. They were watching. Because deep down, each of them sensed it. This wasn't the end of Claire's trial. It was only the beginning. The compound was quieter than usual the following morning. Not silent, never silent, but quieter. The clang of weights, the barking of instructors, the pounding of boots across gravel, all carried the same intensity as before. Yet beneath it ran an undercurrent of curiosity, an invisible hum that pulsed through the ranks of candidates. Claire had returned. She stood at the edge of the field again, her hoodie traded for a plain athletic top and her leggings swapped for shorts. The shift was subtle, but it spoke volumes. Yesterday she had been a visitor. Today she looked like she belonged. The men noticed immediately. Some muttered under their breath, others smirked, but most kept their eyes fixed on her, waiting. Nobody would admit it aloud, but she had unsettled them. Outsiders weren't supposed to last. Outsiders weren't supposed to be trained candidates on obstacle times or crank out pull-ups that matched the top tier. Outsiders weren't supposed to stay calm when the chief himself tried to break them down. But Claire had done all that. And now she was back. Jake leaned against a post, watching with folded arms, half amused, half proud. He knew Claire's mind better than most. When she got that look in her eye, the one that said, "What if I try?" there was no stopping her. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't arrogant. She was simply relentless. Chief Harris blew his whistle, calling the men to attention. His voice carried over the compound like a storm. "All right, listen up. Today isn't about speed. It isn't about looking tough for the cameras you wish were here. Today is about grit. Pure grit. We're going to see who breaks." His gaze swept over the line of men, then lingered pointedly on Claire. "Endurance circuit," he barked. "Timed, no excuses, go." The candidates launched forward into the gauntlet, a series of exercises designed to strip away everything's strength, stamina, ego until only willpower remained. Push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, pull-ups, sprints, sandbag carries, rope climbs. Over and over, in endless rotation, until the body screamed and the mind begged for release. The stopwatch ticked, each second dragging like an anchor. Claire dropped into the dirt with the others. Her palms pressed into the earth, her body rising and falling in rhythm. 1 push-up, 2, 10, 50. Sweat slicked her skin, her arms trembled. But she never broke cadence. Around her, men grunted, cursed, faltered. On the sit-ups, she locked her fingers behind her head, elbows brushing her knees in precise arcs. 30, 60, 90. Her abs burned, but her breathing stayed controlled. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the world shrink down to the sound of her breath and the pounding of her heartbeat. Burpees nearly crushed her. The violent drop. To the ground, the push-up, the explosive jump. It was a cycle of punishment. Her thighs screamed, her lungs clawed for oxygen, her chest felt like it would burst. For a flicker of a second, she thought about stopping. Then her father's voice cut through the haze. The body breaks before the mind does. Her lips parted in a faint smile, even as sweat stung her eyes. She hit the dirt again, pushed up, leaped. High, and again, and again. By the time they reached the rope climbs, men were dropping out. Some sat slumped in the dirt, heads bowed, their strength gone. The instructors shouted, dragging them back to their feet, but their eyes were glazed. They were finished. Claire gripped the rope, her palms raw, and began to climb. Her legs wrapped, her arms pulled, her breath came in ragged bursts. At the top, she slapped the beam, slid down, and without pausing, grabbed another rope. She didn't hear the murmurs of disbelief around her. She didn't see the looks of astonishment. All she saw was the next obstacle, the next chance to keep moving. Minutes bled into an hour, then another. The field was littered with broken bodies, men sprawled in exhaustion, chests heaving. But Claire, though drenched, though trembling, was still moving. Jake watched, stunned despite himself. He had seen her run marathons, swim until her lips turned blue, bike through storms. But this was different. This wasn't just endurance. This was war against limits, fought in plain view of men who had sworn she wouldn't last. Then came the run, the final trial of the circuit. 4 miles, full pack, on sand. The candidates strapped on weighted packs, their shoulders sagging beneath the burden. Claire tightened hers, feeling the straps dig into her collarbones, the weight pressing her down. The sand stretched ahead like an endless desert, soft and treacherous beneath every step. "Move!" Harris roared. A pack bit into her back as she launched forward. Each step sank deep, each lift dragged, but she forced herself onward. The ocean wind lashed against her face, salt spray stinging her eyes. Her calves screamed, her knees threatened to buckle, her lungs clawed for breath. 1 mile, 2. The field stretched thin, men staggering, falling behind. Claire kept going, her pace steady. She passed one candidate, then another. By the 3rd mile, the disbelief was no longer whispered. It was shouted. "She's still going. She's beating me. How the hell is she beating me? No way she finishes this pace." But she did. At the final stretch, her body begged her to stop, every nerve ablaze with pain. Yet she pushed harder, teeth gritted, vision narrowing to a single point ahead, the finish. When she crossed it, the stopwatch froze. Chief Harris stared at the time, his jaw tightening. The record 12 years unbroken was suddenly within reach. The men around her collapsed, some groaning, some cursing, some staring at her like she wasn't real. Claire fell to her knees, chest heaving, sweat dripping from her chin. She didn't smile, didn't raise her fists in victory. She just breathed, letting the weight of the moment settle over her. For the first time, Harris's eyes flickered not with scorn, but with something resembling respect. "You're close," he said gruffly, his voice low enough that only those near him heard. "Closer than anyone's been in 12 years. The words hung in the air like electricity. Claire lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The fire burning there said everything. She hadn't come here to watch. She hadn't come here to prove anyone wrong. She had come because the barrier was there. And now it was beginning to crack. The sun was only a pale glow on the horizon when the candidates assembled again, their shadows stretching long across the sand. The air carried the bite of salt and the faint roar of waves, but the compound itself felt heavier than usual, as if everyone sensed something was about to break. Claire stood among them, hair tied back, shoulders squared, a faint soreness in her limbs from yesterday's circuit. She should have been exhausted. Many of the men still moved stiffly, there, faces drawn and hollow. But fatigue had always been her companion, and she wore it like armor. Chief Harris paced in front of them, his boots crunching against gravel. His expression was unreadable, but his words cut like steel. "Yesterday, you ran further than you. Thought you could. You climbed higher. You carried more. Most of you broke. That's the point." His eyes swept over the group before settling unavoidably on Claire. But there's one test that remains the standard. One test that defines whether you're the kind of person who survives here or the kind who fades. He gestured toward the obstacle course, its wooden walls and ropes silhouetted against the rising sun. 12 years, he said, his voice dropping lower, heavier. 12 years since anyone has beaten the record. Hundreds have tried. Men stronger than you, faster than you, meaner than you. Every one of them fell short. The words hung. in the air like a challenge meant for everyone, and yet everyone knew who they were really aimed at. Claire's gaze followed the course. She'd run it once already, felt its brutality in her bones. But today, the weight of expectation pressed harder than the sandbags on her shoulders yesterday. She wasn't just fighting her own limits anymore. She was fighting the ghost of a legend. "Line up!" Harris barked. The men shuffled forward. Claire took her place near the middle, her hands flexing at her sides, fingers brushing dust from her palms. Jake stood at the perimeter, arms folded, his face tense. He didn't cheer, didn't call out encouragement. He knew better. This was her fight, her silence. The whistle blew. The world exploded into motion. Candidates hurled themselves at the first wall, scrambling, clawing, pulling their bodies over. Claire launched upward, her fingers gripping the edge, legs coiling like springs. She swung over cleanly, landing with fluid grace. The rope climb came next. Her hands burned instantly, raw skin grinding against coarse fibers, but she pulled anyway, arms flexing, legs locking, body rising. At the top, she slapped the beam, descended in a controlled slide, and sprinted onward. One obstacle flowed into the next. Crawl through mud, leap the ditch, monkey bars slick with sweat, the balance beam trembling underfoot. Her body ached. Lungs screamed, vision blurred, but her rhythm never faltered. Every rep of training, every mile she had ever run, every voice that had told her she couldn't, it all converged here, in this crucible of grit. Halfway through, men began to stumble. One fell from the monkey bars, landing hard with a curse. Another crawled out of the tunnel gasping, mud caked across his face. They kept moving, but slower, weaker. Claire surged past them, her ponytail whipping like a banner of defiance. "Keep eyes on her." One instructor barked, stopwatch in hand. His voice cracked with urgency. Harris glanced at his own watch, eyes narrowing. She wasn't just fast, she was on pace. On record-breaking pace. The final stretch loomed. The tall wall. The monster that drained the last ounce of strength from every candidate. Claire approached, chest heaving, legs quaking under her. She launched upward, fingertips just brushing the edge, then slipped, landing hard on the dirt. The men watching exhaled sharply, some shaking their heads. That's it. Their eyes seemed to say she's done. But Claire didn't stop. She staggered back, dirt smearing her palms, and charged again. This time her hands caught solidly. Her arms screamed, her shoulders trembled, but she pulled, teeth clenched, muscles burning with fire. Slowly, painfully, she lifted herself, swung one leg over, and rolled onto the top. Jake's fists clenched at his sides. "Come on, Claire." She slid down the far side and hit the ground running. The finish line stretched ahead, glowing in the first rays of sunrise. Each step was agony. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead, and her vision narrowed to a tunnel of light and dust. The stopwatch ticked. She crossed the line and collapsed to her knees, palms digging into the dirt, chest heaving like it might split open. Sweat streamed from her face, mixing with grit, but she didn't care. She had left everything on that course. The instructors swarmed, their eyes wide, whispering urgently among themselves. Harris lifted his stopwatch, staring at the numbers as if unwilling to believe them. His jaw flexed, his eyes flicked from the watch to Claire, then back again. Jake stepped closer, his heart hammering in his chest. "Well?" he demanded. Harris's voice came low, gravelly, but it carried. She broke it. The compound erupted. Shouts, disbelief, curses, laughter. Men who had mocked her days earlier now stared in shock, some shaking their heads, others clapping in reluctant admiration. A 12-year-old record, unbroken by some of the toughest men alive, had just fallen shattered by the outsider they never thought would last a day. Claire lifted her head, eyes locking on Harris. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply breathed, her chest rising and falling, her expression calm. Harris held her gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he gave the faintest nod, not approval, not surrender, but respect. Jake couldn't hold back his grin. He rushed to her, sighed, crouching down. "You did it," he whispered, pride thick in his voice. Claire shook her head faintly, still catching her breath. "We did it," she corrected softly. "Every run, every push, every word from Dad, they brought me here." But inside, in the quiet corners of her heart, she knew the truth. She hadn't come here to prove anything to them. She hadn't come here for validation or recognition. She had come because the record was there, daring her, whispering that she wasn't enough. And now, as the sun climbed higher and the men around her stared in awe, she had answered. The barrier was gone. The compound was alive in a new way the morning after Claire broke the 12-year record. It wasn't louder, exactly. It wasn't chaotic. It was different, like the hum of electricity before a storm, charged with tension, curiosity, and a quiet reverence. Candidates moved with purpose, their conversations hushed but animated. Yesterday's disbelief had transformed into awe, mixed with a pinch of disbelief. For the first time, they were forced to reckon with the fact that a woman won. They had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed, had shattered a record they had considered untouchable. Claire stood at the edge of the training field, stretching her arms, adjusting her hoodie, her face calm but focused. She wasn't basking in glory. She didn't need to. Recognition had never been her goal. Yet she sensed it, the shift in the air, the way men glanced her way before quickly averting their eyes, the quiet nods that carried unspoken acknowledgement. Jake was at her side, his grin subtle but proud. "They're watching," he said softly, nodding toward the line of candidates. "Warming up." "I know," Claire replied, rolling her shoulders. "Good or bad, they're watching." Yesterday had been the barrier-breaking day. Today was about consolidation. Respect wasn't given, it was earned, maintained, and reinforced through consistency. Claire understood that. She also understood the delicate balance of stepping into a world built on tradition, toughness, and hierarchy, where even admiration could be tinged with suspicion. Chief Harris blew his whistle, calling the candidates together. The men lined up, their expressions a mix of determination, curiosity, and humility. Harris's gaze swept over them before locking on Claire. "You broke the record," he said. Voice firm, not celebratory. "And in doing so, you've earned the right to be here, on this field, among the best we produce. But understand this respect isn't automatic. It has to be reinforced. You want to stand here? You need to prove that yesterday wasn't luck." Claire nodded, her calm eyes unwavering. "I understand," she said simply. Harris's mouth twitched, half surprise, half approval. He turned back to the men. "Get moving. Circuit, max effort, no shortcuts." The candidates surged forward, and Claire moved with them, sliding seamlessly into the rhythm of the exercises. The push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, rope climbs, every motion precise, every breath controlled. She didn't hesitate. She didn't falter. And the men around her began to notice, really notice, what it meant to be not just strong, but relentless, composed under pressure, and mentally unyielding. One of the candidates, a tall, muscular man named Cole, grunted as he struggled with the pull-up bar. Claire dropped down beside him, steadying her stance. "Keep your core tight," she said, quietly, demonstrating with her own form. "Breathe out at the top. Don't rush." Cole's eyes widened. He had expected mockery, or perhaps silence. But her voice wasn't condescending. It wasn't flirtatious. It was straightforward, factual, and surprisingly authoritative. He adjusted, followed her cues, and felt himself pulling higher than he thought possible. Another candidate, Marcus, stumbled over the monkey bars. Claire ran to the side, offering a guiding hand. "Swing with your hips, not just your arms," she coached. "Momentum is everything." By the third repetition of the obstacle circuit, the mood had shifted. Men who had mocked her yesterday were now listening. Whispered tips spread among the group, most referencing Claire's techniques. Her presence had altered the dynamic. She was no longer an outsider. She was a teacher, a benchmark, a reminder of what was possible. Even Harris watched differently. He barked instructions, tested endurance, measured output, but there was a subtle adjustment in his posture, a recognition that Claire's performance had changed the equation. She wasn't just a visitor who had surprised them. She was a force, in her own right. Jake leaned toward her during a brief water break. "Looks like you're gaining fans," he said with a faint smirk. Claire chuckled softly. "Or grudging students," she replied. "Respect isn't about admiration, it's about trust. They need to know I can handle it, every time." The remainder of the morning focused on endurance. Runs with packs, timed circuits, and endless repetitions. Claire pushed through each drill with intensity, careful not to show fatigue. Her pace never faltered, her focus never wavered. Men glanced her way, some whispering tips, others silently benchmarking themselves against her. By mid-afternoon, the transformation was evident. The initial skepticism had given way to cautious admiration. Candidates who had scoffed now sought her advice, tried to emulate her form, or simply matched her pace. Claire's influence was subtle but profound. She led not by command, but by example. Even the instructors couldn't ignore it. Harris observed her, noting the seamless efficiency of movement, the controlled breathing, the mental resilience. The record had been shattered, yes, but her continued performance proved it wasn't luck. It was preparation, discipline, and an innate understanding of endurance. After the final circuit, Claire collapsed onto the mat, chest heaving, arms trembling. Around her, candidates gathered, some still panting, some silently watching. Harris approached, expression inscrutable, and gave a slow nod. "You've earned it," he said simply. "Not just for breaking the record yesterday, but for how you continue today. That's respect." A ripple of murmurs passed through the men. Nods, pats on the back, and finally, some genuine smiles. For the first time, Claire felt the weight of her achievement acknowledged, not as an anomaly, but as a demonstration of skill, endurance, and resilience. Jake crouched beside her, handing her a water bottle. "Think they finally get it?" he asked. Claire took a slow sip, wiping her brow. "Some do," she said. "Others will take longer. But they will. You can't fake this. You can't cheat. The work. Eventually, everyone sees it." By sunset, the compound had changed. The SEAL candidates moved differently, their eyes carrying a new layer of respect, their interactions subtly altered by her presence. Claire had not only broken a 12-year record, but she had also rewritten the narrative of what was possible within those walls. As she stood alone at the edge of the field later, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon, she felt the familiar spark, the quiet thrill that had driven her through every marathon, triathlon, and obstacle in her life. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. And for the SEAL candidates, Claire wasn't just a record breaker anymore. She was a benchmark, a symbol, proof that limits were meant to be tested, challenged, and when necessary, shattered. The morning air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of the ocean across the SEAL training compound. Claire stood at the edge of the obstacle course once more, her gaze sweeping across the wooden walls, ropes, and balance beams that had challenged, humbled, and now celebrated her. 12 years of records, doubts, and unbroken history had been overturned. Yet for Claire, the moment wasn't just about breaking a number. It was about what came next. Her hands flexed, fingers brushing against the rope fibers as memories of the past week flooded her mind. She remembered the first hesitant steps onto the compound, the doubts whispered under breaths, the laughter of men certain she wouldn't last a single drill. She remembered the pain, the burning lungs, screening muscles, blistered hands, and the exhilaration of pushing past it. She remembered the spark of curiosity that had first led her to ask, quietly, "What if I gave it a try?" Now that spark had grown into something far greater. The candidates moved around her, still exhausted from the previous day's trials, yet they carried themselves differently. Their glances toward Claire were no longer tinged with mockery or disbelief. Some offered subtle nods, others sought her advice, and a few even waited for her to demonstrate a technique before attempting it themselves. Jake, standing at the perimeter, caught her eye and gave a faint, proud smile. He didn't need words. He had seen this transformation before she had, in every race, every climb, every relentless mile. Chief Harris approached, his boots crunching against the gravel. His face was unreadable, but there was a weight in his steps that hadn't been there before. He stopped in front of Claire and said simply, "You've done more than break a record. You've shown them what it means to push beyond limits. That changes the culture here." Claire's lips curled into a faint, tired smile. "I just wanted to know what was possible," she said. Her voice was steady, even, but there was an undeniable warmth beneath it, a satisfaction born not of victory alone, but of challenge met and mastered. Harris nodded. "And they'll carry that with them. Not just today, not just this week. Your presence, your performance, your focus sets a standard. You've created a benchmark they can't ignore." As the day unfolded, Claire worked alongside the candidates, guiding, demonstrating, and pushing herself in tandem. The exercises were brutal, designed to mimic the relentless pace of SEAL training. Weighted runs, obstacle circuits, endurance drills, and mental challenges meant to test resolve. Yet this time, Claire moved differently. She wasn't just competing against a stopwatch or a record. She was teaching, inspiring, showing others the power of perseverance, focus, and mental fortitude. A young candidate, barely out of high school, struggled on the rope climb, arms shaking violently. Claire dropped to the ground beside him, gripping the rope herself. "Use your legs as much as your arms," she coached. "Swing, don't just pull. Let momentum do half the work." The candidate's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with gratitude, and on the second attempt, he scaled the rope cleanly. Around them, other candidates murmured encouragement, trying to emulate her form. Claire's influence rippled through the group like a quiet but unstoppable tide. By mid-afternoon, Harris called a halt to the drills. The sun had climbed high, and the sweat-streaked men and women stood, chests heaving, listening. Harris's gaze fell on Claire. "Today isn't about numbers," he said. "It's about legacy. You've created one, whether you wanted to or not. And the question now is, what will you do with it?" Claire wiped sweat from her brow, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "I've always chased limits, not recognition. But now, I see that limits aren't just personal. They can inspire others to find their own. That's the real legacy." The candidates shifted uncomfortably, absorbing her words. Some had thought of limits as walls, impassable barriers. Now they saw them differently, as challenges waiting to be met, tested, and transcended. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the compound quieted. Men sat in small clusters, sharing water, bandaging blisters, recounting the days. Events. Claire stood alone for a moment, watching the ocean waves crash against the shore. Her body was exhausted, every muscle aching, but her heart thrummed with something stronger than pain fulfillment. Jake approached quietly, standing beside her without interrupting the silence. "You know," he said, voice low, "they'll be talking about this for years. Not just the record, not just the drills. You've changed something in them. You've changed the culture here." Claire shook her head, smiling faintly. "I just did what I always do, push a little further than I thought I could." They chose to follow. A few minutes later, Harris joined them, his expression softer than it had been during the trials. "Records can be broken," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. "But legacy, that's harder." "You've earned both." Claire nodded. "I didn't. Do it for the record." Her voice was steady, sure. "I did it to see how far I could go. The record. It just proves the rest of it is possible." And it was. The next weeks were a blend of training, mentorship, and quiet observation. Claire continued to run alongside the candidates, guide them through obstacles, and occasionally challenge even the instructors with her stamina and focus. Every day she became more than a record breaker. She became a living testament to what discipline, resilience, and curiosity could achieve. The candidates began to adopt her methods, her pacing, her mental approach. They weren't just learning exercises. They were learning endurance, strategy, and self-belief. Claire's influence became woven into the culture of the compound, subtle but indelible. By the end of the month, even the most skeptical men and women approached her for advice, strategy tips, and encouragement. The record she had broken became secondary to the more profound impact she had made, a standard of excellence that inspired others to push harder, aim higher, and refuse to accept impossible as a final answer. On her final day at the compound, Claire stood at the edge of the field one last time. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, the wind tugging at her hair, her body tired, but her spirit soaring. She looked back at the obstacles she had conquered, the candidates she had taught, the legacy she had begun to cement. She had entered the SEAL training world as a visitor, a curious outsider, and left as a record breaker, a teacher, and a symbol. Every eye that had doubted her, every voice that had whispered she can't, had been silenced not with words, but with action. Jake appeared beside her, handing her a water bottle. "Think they'll remember you?" he asked. Claire smiled faintly, accepting the bottle. "They'll remember the lesson," she said. "Not me, the lesson. That limits are meant to be tested, that persistence matters more than size or strength, and that curiosity can lead to extraordinary things." As the sun finally set, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Claire felt the quiet satisfaction that comes with completing something monumental, not for applause, not for recognition, but because she had challenged herself, faced the impossible, and emerged transformed. Her legacy wasn't just in the shattered 12-year record, or in the respect she had earned. It was in the ripple effect of courage, determination, and endurance she had left behind, a testament to what happens when someone dares to ask, quietly, "What if I gave it a try?" And somewhere in the distance, the SEAL candidates ran, pushed, and climbed, carrying pieces of her lesson with every breath, every stride, every determined step. The record was broken. The barrier had been shattered. The legacy was cemented. And Claire Whitaker, athlete, outsider, record breaker, walked away with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that the world was bigger, bolder, and far more possible than anyone had told her.